We are starting King Hezekiah tonight, and remember that his dad was named Ahaz, and what do we remember about him? He was evil, yes. Quite the opposite of the stellar human being. And he was not just evil, he was awful. He was like completely anti-Jehovah, not just worship Baal and Jehovah. He like shut up the temple, he barred the doors, kept people from coming in there. He made all sorts of altars all over Jerusalem, and he kept getting punished with defeats, and he sacrificed his sons to Molech, things like that. Remember that Isaiah comes to him and says, God tells me that I can offer you a choice. Do you want to listen? He goes, I don't want to listen at all. I don't care. And so he's just an awful, awful man. And that is the father of Hezekiah. The polar opposite of that. This picture up here is a bulla, and I know you're like, what does that even mean? Because I had to look it up as well. But it's really small. That is 1 centimeter, which is about the size of your pinky nail across. And so not real big, but this is the royal seal of King Hezekiah, and this was found in the Ophel excavations, and that little side print is who found it. Her name is Dr. Eliot Mazar, and it's at the foot of the southern wall in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And this is a bulla, and it measures just over 1 centimeter. It's a seal impression. That's a 2-winged sun disk. I was like, is that a moth or what? But it's the sun in the middle of that circle, and there's wings coming off of it, and that's an ankh on there. So it's really got an Egyptian feel to it. And I don't know if that's the style or if that's just what he picked, or anyways, but that's what's on there. And then that inscription around the sun says, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. And this was discovered along with 33 other in some dirt next to a 10th century building. And what this is like a signet ring of the old days. And so instead of wax and you plunge your ring in there as the king's seal, they would tie some string on there and put some clay on it, and then they would put this into there, and that would mean, hey, this is an official communique of King Hezekiah. So this is a huge deal, and it's a signature and the authenticity of the documents. And then once again, it's just cool to see archaeology line up with the Bible. That's why later on, we'll see some different things from the surrounding kings that mention Hezekiah and we've seen throughout the class different archaeological things that it just kind of reinforce things. I enjoy that particular bit of history. There we go. So let's dive in. We'll be in 2 Chronicles, and we'll just read the first 2 verses of chapter 29 real quick. Hezekiah began to reign when he was 25 years old, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, according to all that David his father had done. So right out of the gate, we have a rousing endorsement of him. He's 25 years old, so he's not a child. He's his own man, which we've seen some problems with regencies and things like that. Had a 29-year reign, not close to the longest, but a good decent reign. And then we have his mother, and she is the daughter of Zechariah. And it looks like, at least according to this man, G. Campbell Morgan, who I'm sure you've all heard of. I had never heard of him until I found this. His mother was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah, probably mentioned in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 2, as one of the faithful witnesses. So that's in Isaiah 8:2. It's Isaiah is sending these 2 guys, and one is Zechariah, as reliable witness, as faithful witnesses. And so this possible friendship of his mother and the prophet, which is this man's Mr. Morgan's words, combined with the certainty up to this time he had been under the influence of Isaiah's ministry, may account for Hezekiah's actions on coming to the throne. So let's different language for saying that his mom might have been friends with Isaiah and that might have influenced Hezekiah, because we'll see that Hezekiah is the polar opposite of his dad, like 180 degrees different. Did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and we'll see that. It says, like David his father. And then let's turn over to 2 Kings chapter 18. And I've tried to stay in Chronicles just for ease, but Hezekiah, we've got to bounce back and forth between 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. So 2 Kings 18, verses 5 and 6. And this is talking about Hezekiah. In 2 Kings 18, verse 5, it says, he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those that were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. So, what I would take from this is that he is the greatest king in Judah history. Got a David over here. We'll get you some names to read, David.
Well, and if you go back to verse 4, it even says he removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah, and he broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until the days of the people of Israel had made offerings to it. So to add that on, and as a note for verse 4 in my Bible, it says Hezekiah was the first king of Judah to totally eradicate the high places.
Yes.
So just
it steals all my thunder for later slides.
Oh, does it?
No.
I was going to.
No. Do not apologize to me. No, that is very well found, because context is always important. But yes, we will definitely talk about that sentence later. It just matches up later with the stuff he's doing. But you are exactly right. He is the only king to tear down the high places. That we've talked about that with other kings, that he would remove the Baals, but he left the high places. And Hezekiah is not like that. Hezekiah may be arguably the greatest king, and I think 2 Kings, whoever authored that, would agree with that. So anything on this introduction so far? Nope, both of you.
A couple points. First, the same description is given to Josiah. So it may not be a literal greatest, none came before or after. It may just a generality, because Scripture does that a lot. Don't want to take anything away from Hezekiah, because Scripture speaks very highly of him. The other point I wanted to make is, in addition to maybe his mother being associated with Isaiah and that being a good influence, remember his grandfather, Jotham, was around, I think if my math's right, he would have been about 9 when his grandfather died.
Right.
I like to think that he had an influence as well. And I'll make the same point when we get to Manasseh. I'm inclined to suspect that Manasseh gave up on his son, but tried with Josiah to do the same thing. So that could be another avenue of good influence. No,
you're absolutely right. That, but we're just not told. But I agree 100% with your analysis. Did you?
Yeah, I just kind of thinking along the same lines as Aaron's first point with regard to Josiah also being described as there was no king like him before him nor after him. And I kind of was thinking about both of those two verses, and the way it describes Hezekiah is he trusted in the Lord so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah. Whereas Josiah, there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all his heart and all his soul and all his might. And so I just wonder if kind of they were the best at the best of the best at maybe slightly different things. And I don't necessarily think there's much of a difference, but I'm a lawyer. My job is to overanalyze stuff. So that's just a thought that I had.
Well done, my friend. Also, one side note, when I was looking for pictures, because, I tried to find something. If you'll remember, the picture of Ahab was like a wood cutting. And then I found that for Hezekiah, and I think it said, like, Rex Ezekias. So is Zacchaeus the same as Hezekiah? But anyway, that I kind of was piecing together, and then I was like, I can't get distracted. I need to do this. Because now that I work like a regular person, I have to do this in the evenings. So if you can work 2 days in a row and then be off 4 days, that's pretty cool. Especially for getting lessons done. So I highly recommend that. Anyways, as we were, let's go back and let's read 2 Chronicles 29, 3 through 11. And then this has no names, so we won't let David read it. But if anyone else would like to volunteer, even David, I'll let you volunteer. Any volunteers for reading? John, thank you.
In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the square on the east and said to them, Hear me, Levites, now consecrate yourselves and consecrate the house of the Lord, the God of your fathers, and carry out the filth from the holy place. For our fathers have been unfaithful and have done what was evil in the sight of the Lord our God. They have forsaken him and have turned away their faces from the habitation of the Lord and turned their backs. They also shut the doors of the vestibule and put out the lamps and have not burned incense or offered burnt offerings in the holy place to the God of Israel. Therefore the wrath of the Lord came on Judah and Jerusalem, and he has made them an object of horror, of astonishment, and of hissing, as you see with your own eyes. For behold, our fathers have fallen by the sword, and our sons and our daughters and their wives are in captivity for this. Now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, in order that his fierce anger may turn away from us. My sons, do not now be negligent, for the Lord has chosen you to stand in his presence, to minister to him and to be his ministers and make offerings to him.
Thank you, John. So he begins reforming immediately in the first year of his reign, in the first month. So he doesn't just wait around and be like, well, let me feel out this kingship job. He's like, no. We're going to fix the mess that my dad made, and we're going to fix it right now. He opens the temple immediately because remember his dad had barred it. We're not going to talk about Jehovah. You are not going to worship him. We're going to put altars around the temple and all in Jerusalem for other gods. And he repairs the doors so that they can go in and worship after they were wrecked and disheveled. He calls all the priests and the Levites together and he says, you get yourselves ready to minister to the Lord. So you consecrate yourselves because we haven't been doing any of this while Ahaz was king. Remove all the filth. So get all the idols out, maybe even just literal filth. Get that out of there because our fathers were unfaithful and incurred the wrath of God. And we read that with Ahaz's reign, that God was punishing them for his idolatry and his wickedness. Andrew? And I think this might also be the guys, because that's Isaiah's job, to be like, hey, this wrath is coming. You better look out. Go ahead, Andrew.
It really makes you question whether, since Hezekiah starts his reign at 25, if he's looking through Ahaz's whole reign like, what are you doing? If you just turned, because he does this so fast, you just turned back, everything would be better for you.
Maybe he tried. You know, that's once again what we want included in the Bible is not what God says that we need. That sure, we'd want to know, you know, there's an aside, a second chapter or another, you know, 3rd Chronicles where Hezekiah says, hey, Dad, you're going off the rails, man. And whatever. But we don't know. I have zero clue about their relationship as father and son or even king and prince. But yeah, I wondered the same thing, what's going on here. But
that was an interesting comment. And again, when we look at the responsibility of teaching your children, do we have any indication who was teaching Hezekiah?
Just guesses. Aaron's guess of grandfather is just as good as this G. Campbell Morgan guessing that the Zechariah, a friend of Isaiah, was teaching him. We do know that Isaiah's around, that Isaiah definitely had interaction with his father. Maybe he is around. Maybe he's in the royal court and he's just not having any sway. But regardless, Hezekiah listens and acts, whereas Ahaz was almost cartoonishly evil. But no, we have no inkling as to his childhood or anything like that. So yeah, he puts together the words of the prophet. Maybe looks back in history. Maybe he finds a history book, maybe the Chronicles, and he's like, wow, look at this. Great-grandpa was doing fine, and even greater-grandpa was doing great, and and the land prospered because God was with us. Let's look at David. Oh yeah, look, man after God's own heart. God was with him the whole time, beat Goliath, great king. And then these other guys, they abandoned God, and God sent army after army after army to destroy us and break down our walls. So he knows that the wrath of God comes from not following him. And so in his heart, he tells the priests and the Levites, in my heart, let me quote it exactly. Verse 10, now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, in order that his fierce anger may turn away from us. So he is making a pact. I learned, I don't remember which class it was, but Aaron's a great teacher when he does teach, so I highly recommend him. If you ever see his name on the class sheet, take that class, because you learn that covenant is a cutting. And I never knew that until whatever class that was, Genesis, Hebrews, one of those. And you walk through the pieces of the animals. So that's Abraham and God making the covenant, that it's not just a contract. That's what I had always thought of as a youth and even into adulthood, that this is, a covenant, that's just a deal. Like I make a covenant to buy a car. Okay, yeah, I'll give you X $1,000 for your car. Okay, then that's a covenant. No, it's not the deal. You make this covenant, you pass through together as the same party, and you make a pact. And so Hezekiah makes a pact with the Lord. I will follow you, Lord. And he tells the priests and the Levites, this is going to be a pact. This is a covenant between me and God, and we're all going to join together, and we're going to follow Jehovah, and we're going to undo all this wrong that has been done. Just making sure I'm not leaving anything out. Just going back to the fathers before him and all the wicked kings, when he says in verse 6, our fathers have been unfaithful and done what was evil. They have forsaken him and turned away their faces and turned their backs to the habitation of the Lord. So that's exactly what Ahaz did when he completely ignored Jehovah and went totally for idols. Didn't even include Jehovah. So it's like they turned their backs on him. We're going to do the opposite. So any comments on this? I've been talking a lot and stealing all the thunder. Once, twice, sold. Let's move on. 12 through 36. I will read 12 through 15 just to keep you from having to do that. And then if somebody wants to read, you know what, I'll read through 19 and then I'll let somebody else read, just because it kind of completes the thought. So starting in verse 12 of 2 Chronicles 29. And if you took my Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther class, you might be like, why are you reading these names? Because God saw fit to write them down. That's why we're reading them. These are important to them, so we will make them important to us and try to figure it out. But anyway, verse 12. Then the Levites arose, Mahath, the son of Amasai, and Joel, the son of Azariah, of the sons of the Kohathites, and of the sons of Merari, Kish, the son of Abdi, and Azariah, the son of Jehalalel, and of the Gershonites, Joah, the son of Zimmah, and Eden, the son of Joah, and of the sons of Elizaphan, Shimri and Jeuel, and of the sons of Asaph, Zechariah and Mattaniah, and of the sons of Heman, Jehuel and Shimei, and of the sons of Jeduthun, Shemaiah and Uziel. They gathered their brothers and consecrated themselves and went in as the king commanded by the words of the Lord to cleanse the house of the Lord. The priests went into the inner part of the house of the Lord to cleanse it, and they brought out all the uncleanness that they found in the temple of the Lord into the court of the house of the Lord. And the Levites took it and carried it out to the brook Kidron. They began to consecrate on the first day of the month, and on the 8th day of the month they came to the vestibule of the Lord. Then for 8 days they consecrated the house of the Lord, and on the 16th day of the first month they finished. Then they went into Hezekiah the king and said, "We have cleansed all the house of the Lord, the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and the table for the showbread and all its utensils. All the utensils that King Ahaz discarded in his reign when he was faithless, we have made ready and consecrated, and behold, they are before the altar of the Lord." And going back just to the names, if you know, like Asaph wrote some of the Psalms, and so that's the singers, I think, and that's their jobs, these different divisions of these men. And so that's what, and they're all gathering together, and they go and they do what the king commands. So they obey. There we go. It takes 16 days to do all this work. 16 days to remove the idols and all the uncleanness. And Austin, did you have a comment about that on, I know the blue is your...
Yeah, I just think, 16 days, they would have had to have been thinking about how much there was to do if it took them 16 days just to clean up the mess that Ahaz made. I think that would have been a reminder of how far away Ahaz had gotten the people from God. I think that would have been really, because I don't think this was just a, do it an hour or two every day and then come back the next day. I think this was basically their job for over 2 weeks.
I agree.
And that would have made an impact.
As a non-important aside, do you think that the time it took was because they were remaking some of the stuff that Ahaz had taken out of the temple, like reforging it?
Okay, Andrew was saying that, do you think some of that time came from them having to remake some of the stuff that Ahaz had destroyed? Because remember, he had cut up pieces of the utensils of the temple to either just destroy or to make into other idolatrous things. That's possible. Maybe they were some metalsmiths. Aaron? By the time this class is over, I'll find a happy place for this microphone.
Also, if these things are unclean, they take it out. They have to purify themselves and offer sacrifice before they can go back in. So they can't. You can't go in with your own uncleanness on your hands back into the temple to clean it again.
Right.
So there's a lot of ceremonial washing, all these things that we don't think about that probably had to occur.
Yeah, and if you'll notice, where was it? Verse 16, when they bring it out, then the Levites take it. So the priests are inside cleaning up, Berna, and then the Levites get to carry it down.
So do that mean they had to carry it outside of the camp?
I think the Levites did, because they dump it in the brook Kidron, which is a little valley outside of the city. And then, we can read in 1 Kings, we did read that with Asa, but just to remind us that 1 Kings 15:13 reference is when Asa starts to reign. And then 1 Kings 16:13. He also removed Maacah, his mother, from being queen mother because she had made an abominable image for Asherah, and Asa cut down her image and burned it at the brook Kidron. So this is the same place. It's becoming like a dump for unclean things. Get back to where I was. And so they're restoring, let me see. Now we're restoring temple worship. So now how about 20 through the end of the chapter? Shouldn't be any crazy names. Go ahead, Wesley.
Early in the next morning, King Hezekiah gathered the city officials together and went up to the temple of the Lord. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 male lambs, and 7 male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary, and for Judah. The king commanded the priests, the descendants of Aaron, to offer these on the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the bulls, and the priests took the blood and splashed it against the altar. Next they slaughtered the rams and splashed their blood against the altar. Then they slaughtered the lambs and splashed their blood against the altar. The goats for the sin offering were brought before the king and the assembly, and they laid their hands on them. The priests then slaughtered the goats and presented their blood on the altar for a sin offering to atone for all Israel, because the king had ordered the burnt offering and the sin offering for all Israel. He stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with cymbals, harps, and lyres in the way prescribed by David and Gad, the king's seer, and Nathan the prophet. This was commanded by the Lord through his prophets. So the Levites stood ready with David's instruments, and the priests with their trumpets. Hezekiah gave the order to sacrifice the burnt offering on the altar. As the offering began, singing to the Lord began also, accompanied by trumpets and instruments of David, king of Israel. The whole assembly bowed in worship, while the musicians played and the trumpets sounded. All this continued until the sacrifice of the burnt offering was completed. When the offerings were finished, the king and everyone present with him knelt down and worshipped. King Hezekiah and his officials ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. So they sang praises with gladness and bowed down and worshipped. Then Hezekiah said, "You have now dedicated yourselves to the Lord. Come and bring sacrifices and thank offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the assembly brought sacrifices and thank offerings, and all whose hearts were willing brought burnt offerings. The number of burnt offerings the assembly brought was 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 male lambs, all of them for burnt offerings to the Lord. The animals consecrated as sacrifices amounted to 600 bulls, 3,000 sheep and goats. The priests, however, were too few in skin all the burnt offerings. So their relatives, the Levites, helped them until the task was finished and other priests had been consecrated. For the Levites had been more conscientious in consecrating themselves than the priests had been. There were burnt offerings in abundance, together with the fat of the fellowship offerings and the drink offerings that accompanied the burnt offerings. So the service of the temple of the Lord was reestablished. Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced at what God had brought about it for his people, because it was done so quickly.
Thank you, Wesley. So we start out, he restores the temple worship, so there's sacrifices and sin offerings, and it's just, that's what the first part there, and it seems weird to us, but this is dictated in the law. All of these things that you splash the blood and all that stuff like that, because there has to be blood to atone for the sins, and they do all this stuff, and it hasn't been done. So they're following the law. They're by the letter of the law under Hezekiah's direction. Because verse 24, for the king commanded that the burnt offering and the sin offering should be made for all Israel. And then the singers come, and it talks about all the instruments, the cymbals, harps, and lyres that David had commanded, and Gad and Nathan. Did you want to comment on that, Austin?
I'd just been looking at when some of all the imagery about the singers and the music going on, it reminded me of, and I think it's 2 Samuel 6, when David is taking the ark to Jerusalem and how they made it this whole big event with all the sacrifices and the rejoicing and whatnot. And it just reminds me a lot of that, sort of a similar revival, big event for the people.
Right. And
just as one thing I don't think we should overlook very quickly is the Bible specifically says Israel when they're talking about the sacrifices. So Hezekiah isn't doing all of this just for the good of the kingdom of Judah. He's doing it for all of God's people, including those that are still left in Israel at this time. They only have a couple more years before the Assyrians come and capture, but
yes.
I mean, Hezekiah is doing this for the good of all God's people, not just the people of Judah.
Right, and that comes out more explicitly in chapter 30, so that's well observed, unless you read ahead. You and David. Grabbing all my thunder. No, it's perfectly fine. I love it. But they bow and worship, and I like verse 28. The whole assembly worshiped. The singers sang is what the ESV says. You said something else there, Wesley. It says, mine says, the ESV says in verse 28, the whole assembly worshiped, the singers sang, and the trumpeters sounded, and all this continued until the burnt offering was finished. So it's kind of like Austin was saying, it's like a revival. They're excited to be before the Lord again. They're like, wow, we didn't realize how much we missed this. And maybe this is the first time for some of these priests and Levites. And so they're bowing and worshiping, and then they bring, in verse 31, the crowd brings thank offerings of those who are willing heart. So these are like free will offerings that they're bringing now, that this other one was the atonement for Israel. Now, just people in the crowd are bringing animals for sacrifices, and there's not enough priests to take care of all these sacrifices that they're having to be consecrated again, get ritually clean, and some of the Levites, not Levi's, it's jeans. Thank you, that's all I need. The Levites had consecrated themselves and like, we'll step in, we'll help you guys out. And so that there's so much going on that people are of willing heart and trying to get back to God, that they're overwhelming the priesthood with their generosity, their free will offerings to God, to get back to God. And there's so many there that it's just an amazing scene. And then it says, thus the service of the house of the Lord was restored, and Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced because God had provided for the people, for the thing came about suddenly. Remember, Hezekiah is in his first month, and he's like, we got to fix this. You guys get your mind right, get busy. In 16 days, they square away the temple, get all the filth out of it, ritually cleanse it, and then they restore the worship. And so it's suddenly, everybody has a mind to work, like they talk about in Nehemiah when they're rebuilding the word. Everybody's involved here. They have a mind to work. They've set their heart, as Ezra says. It's very similar to that scene in my mind, that they're all working for this common goal to be restored to the Lord. Anything on chapter 29? All right. Oh, did you?
The last thing I put in blue down at the bottom. Just, right. I think, first, as you mentioned, there's so many sacrifices that they can't keep up with them all. And that was another thing that reminded me back of David. It was this whole big event, and the scale is so much that they couldn't keep up with it at the time. But I also wonder kind of what the story is with the priests not being diligent to consecrate themselves. I don't really think it tells us a lot about why they were that way, but I think it's interesting that it tells us they were that way. And we're going to see in verse 30, they had to move the Passover because they couldn't do it on time, because it says because the priests didn't consecrate themselves in time. And so I just think it's really interesting note.
And I don't know. Oh, Aaron has some insight. Maybe. Or just a comment.
Well, I thought about saying something too, but along that lines, if I understand this right, and it's I'm not sure I do because it's complex, but what the Levites did was contrary to the law. And I know when they moved the Passover later on, that's contrary to the law. But God is, we mistakenly think the Old Testament's so regimented. God is not trying to squash these people's will as they come back to him. He's trying to accommodate them.
Right.
He's making an exception here so that they can worship. It's not the way it's normally going to be, but he's trying to encourage them. So when he allows the Passover later on to go on, it's God's mercy in allowing people to come near him,
right.
Even though, they're kind of breaking the rules. But I just find that amazing how God allows that to happen and accepts it. And
with that in mind, as we're reading verse 30, there's a place where Hezekiah prays for pardon from the Lord. So pay particular attention to that as we go over that with that in mind.
I also think my Bible had a cross-reference to Numbers, I think chapter 9, verse 10, that talks about if someone is unclean, not his fault at the time of the Passover, he's still to celebrate it a month later. And so I think that's interesting. I know they've been working so hard to get everything clean, but I think in a way it's a similar analogy because the whole nation, in a sense, after Ahaz was so unclean, and Hezekiah's like, we got to do something about this.
Right.
And so that might be part of it as well.
So let's go, actually. We'll not jump the shark, but before we get into chapter 30, they're going to celebrate the Passover, probably for the first time in a very, very, very long time. It is in about 200 years since they had last celebrated Passover. So let's turn to Numbers chapter 9, and we'll read 1 through 14. And this is the edicts, however you want to look at that, for the Passover. Or 1 through 14. Numbers 9, 1 through 14. Anybody read that for us? Ephraim? Everybody's in Numbers chapter 9, verses 1 through 14.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, let the children of Israel keep the Passover at its appointed time. On the 14th day of this month at twilight, you shall keep it at its appointed time, according to all its rites and ceremonies, you shall keep it. So Moses told the children of Israel that they should keep the Passover. And they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at twilight in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. So the children of Israel did. Now there were certain men who were defiled by a human corpse, so they could not keep the Passover on that day. And they came before Moses and Aaron that day. And those men said to him, we became defiled by a human corpse. Why are we kept from presenting the offering of the Lord at its appointed time among the children of Israel? And Moses said to them, stand still, that I may hear what the Lord will command concerning you. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any one of you or your posterity is unclean because of a corpse, or is far away on a journey, he may still keep the Lord's Passover. On the 14th day of the second month at twilight, they may keep it. They shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall leave none of it until morning, nor break one of its bones. According to all the ordinances of the Passover, they shall keep it. But the man who is clean and is not on a journey and ceases to keep the Passover, that same person shall be cut off from among his people, because he did not bring the offering of the Lord at its appointed time. That man shall bear his sin. And if a stranger dwells among you, and would keep the Lord's Passover, he must do so according to the rite of the Passover and according to its ceremony. You shall have one ordinance, both for the stranger and the native of the land.
All right, thank you, Ephraim. So here we have the first Passover celebrated in the wilderness there, and it's to be done on the first month on the 14th. And we have this stipulation of these guys. I assume they were burying a body. I don't know that they were like, hey, look, a dead body, let's touch it. So they're like, we're unclean, so what are we going to do? And God gives them an asterisk. He says, all right, if you're unclean or you're on a journey, you can keep it in the second month on the 14th day at twilight and have these other things. And it says, but if you are clean and you're in country, then you celebrate the Passover on the correct day. So that may be where Hezekiah came, but anyway, just have that in mind as we go through, because Hezekiah does still beg for pardon as well. So that's the normal or the Passover rules. Let's go back to 2 Chronicles 30. Yeah, we'll start reading. I was going to say, it's like we're going to run out of time. But, so 2 Chronicles 30, Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, to Andrew's point earlier. So Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah and wrote letters also to Ephraim and Manasseh that they should come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to keep the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. For the king and his princes and all the assembly in Jerusalem had taken counsel to keep the Passover in the second month, for they could not keep it at that time because the priests had not consecrated themselves in sufficient number, nor had the people assembled in Jerusalem. So that's not quite the letter of the law, except for the uncleanness, but it wasn't because of a dead body. But there was precedent for the second month. Maybe that's what they were looking at. Either way, they want to hold the Passover feast in Jerusalem. All of Israel and Judah are invited, and that is a significant thing. I think Andrew was right to point that out. That Hezekiah's night, we are all brethren. We are all descendants of Abraham. We are all from Jacob. We are all the chosen people of God. So you come back to the Lord, Israel. I was trying to think if I want to talk about that in a second. But anyways, postponed it to the second month because they couldn't keep it because the priests weren't consecrated in time, to Austin's point just a little while ago. And nor had the people assembled in Jerusalem. So they call everybody, send the letters out, go out into Israel, go into the other tribes, the tribes of, or the kingdom of Israel. And the plan seemed right, verse 4, and the plan seemed right to the king and all the assembly. Yeah, we'll read the proclamation. So they decreed to make a proclamation throughout all Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, that the people should come and keep the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel, at Jerusalem. For they had not kept it as often as prescribed. Remember, you're supposed to do it every year, first month, 14th day. In fact, I think it's over around now. It was either yesterday or today the Passover is over. Anyways, that's a side note. I noticed that on the calendar today, I think. Verse 6, so couriers went throughout all Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his princes, as the king had commanded, saying, O people of Israel, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may turn again to the remnant of you who had escaped from the hand of the kings of Assyria. And let's pause right there, and we'll probably pick up here on Sunday. But Hezekiah comes to the throne of Judah at the end of the king of Israel, the kingdom of Israel. So there's going to be 3 years after the start of his reign when Israel ends, that the Assyrian armies siege Samaria and then the northern kingdom's conquered. And so this is either right at that time, right before Assyria is about to. So it's when somebody would, I can't remember who was mentioning it, but it's that the northern kingdom is ending. So this might be the people who are left over in the land, and Hezekiah is like, return to the Lord, come be with us. Any last comments? We will pick up here. Probably read that again. Chapter 30 in 2 Chronicles. All right, thanks everybody for your comments. We'll, Lord willing, see you Sunday.